Maya. If the camera's shaking, it's because Maya has decided that now I'm recording, we're gonna boop the tripod. Maya, come on. I had really hoped to have the next retro review done for you guys by today, but circumstances dictated that I was not able to finish the game by now, and I obviously like to beat a game before doing a review and making a video about it. However, between the last video and this one, I actually got my hands on an early copy of Absolver and played the game full through, exploring as much, if not all of the world that there was to see, and I really was looking forward to Absolver, and I have a lot of thoughts about the game. So instead of doing something like a top 5 in between retro reviews, I just decided to write a review about Absolver while working on the next proper retro Judge Mathas review. So let's take a look at Absolver. Ah, sweet Lord, save me! This is my unknown attempt at trying to write this script properly, and I pray to the gods above that this time it all works out. Please. Or Satan, whatever, someone just help me. There's a saying that gets tossed around a whole heck of a lot nowadays out in the gaming internets, used to describe big open world games mostly. Wide as an ocean, deep as a puddle. Chances are you've heard it used to describe games like Skyrim or some such. Big open world games with hours of things to do, but the mechanics or the activities themselves are all surface level and don't really require much thought or planning. I personally think the saying is overused, but I appreciate it for what it is. And that saying does not fit Absolver. But I bring it up because I've never seen a game so aptly and succinctly fit into the exact opposite of that saying. Absolver is as wide as a puddle, but has mechanics as deep as an ocean. Sort of. Let me explain. Absolver is marketed as an online melee action game, and its premise is pretty simple, but really appealing. Let a player create their own character, choose one of 3 different martial arts schools to start with, and unleash them into an open world to fight some NPCs, bosses, get loot, and stumble across other players in a similar way that Journey did it, naturally in that world without the ability to talk to them and only emote. You can ignore them, fight alongside them, or just plain kick their sorry asses into the ground. It's a really neat idea. A bit of Journey, a bit of Diablo, and a heavy dose of a fighting game. And man, that first hour or 2 in the game blew my freaking mind. For starters, Absolver is utterly gorgeous. Its simplistic art style, mixed with really pretty fighting animations that flow into one another perfectly, mixed with the satisfying as hell audio for each punch and kick, landing with a satisfying thump or thunk. Oh, it's so good. The fighting system in this game is easily the best part of the entire experience. When you create your character, you'll pick one of 3 different martial arts schools they present to you. What you choose will determine your starting moveset, which stat will affect your damage, and your special defensive abilities. For example, I chose the Windfall style, which more or less is Kung Fu. This meant that my moveset would be a bit less damaging than something like the kickboxing style, but I'd be a bit quicker and more nimble on my feet than other people. Damage would be directly affected by my dexterity stat, and my special defensive moves would be the ability to quickly sidestep and dodge incoming attacks as opposed to absorbing them or parrying them. Each individual move has its own damage and speed to it as well, which could mean the difference between landing an unexpected jab to throw your opponent off his guard or a long wind-up move that could be a great finisher to a combo or be slow enough to give your opponent a tell as to what's coming, allowing them to react accordingly. And your moveset is completely customizable. By meditating, you can head into your moveset, change which attacks happen in which stance, and what strikes will follow up the previous one, creating a near endless options for you to toy with until you find a set of attacks that fits your playstyle perfectly. But wait, there's more. You're not stuck with your opening movesets either. As you fight enemies, both players and NPCs, they'll be using moves on you that your character doesn't know. As you defend against these moves by either blocking or dodging at just the right time, you'll start gaining some experience that coincides with that specific attack that was used against you. Earn enough experience and your character will learn that attack to use as part of his own arsenal as well, regardless of which school of martial arts that it comes from. The catch? In order to keep the experience you gained from defending the attack, you have to defeat your opponent. If you fall in battle instead of them, all that experience you just earned while fighting them is lost. Mix all of that with stamina and stat management and a secret fourth school of martial arts that you can discover after you beat the final boss, and you have one of the most rewarding fighting systems in a game like this that I have ever played. The first few hours of discovering how the mechanics work, perfecting your timing, finding out which attacks work for you while getting your butt handed to you over and over again until you finally beat down that NPC, or better yet, the player that kept laying the smackdown on you, is incredibly satisfying. There's nothing better than going one-on-one with a player you stumbled across and duking it out, testing your martial arts skills in the process. The sense of improvement with each battle is noticeable and makes you want to continue striving to get better and better while learning all the intricacies of the fighting system inside and out. So obviously, the fighting system is great, and I love how it all works so seamlessly together. The problem clearly isn't the mechanics of the game, but like I said, deep as an ocean, wide as a puddle. The issue with the game is the game that surrounds the mechanics. Which sounds really weird, and for a while I couldn't quite pinpoint why this game wasn't blowing my socks off like it felt it should have been. It was so satisfying to play. But once you get the hang of the system, you realize there's really not a whole lot to do with said system. The world itself is gorgeous to look at and really interesting visually, I promise. It's the art style. It's so fantastic. And the story, while starting out promising, being one of many prospects sent into this abandoned and destroyed world to fight and train in, for reasons, is vague and left entirely too open. And I don't mean that in a neat Dark Souls way where the world is vague but telling a story in and of itself with hints and clues as to what happened laying around the world or buried in the lore of a boss item that you may have picked up. I mean, it kind of maybe almost tells an interesting story with great visuals, but almost immediately upon giving the player control, treats the story as nothing more than a reason that you're wandering this world to hunt down bosses and fight them. Your goal in the game is to defeat a total of 9 bosses in combat that you must hunt down across this open world to achieve your goal. And that in and of itself isn't an issue. There are plenty of games that use the story merely as a means to an end to get the player to go out and play the game. So strip away the story and you're left with this world with 9 bosses and random NPCs to fight with the occasional player that you run across. But while the world is gorgeous to look at, it's wholly uninteresting to explore. There are no secret little hidden areas to check out and explore, and the ones that you could consider secret and hidden are not that hard to find. And you can't jump or climb anything, so you're more or less following a road until it splits off into multiple directions. You choose one of those directions, explore it while fighting some bad guys, until you reach the next branching road, or until you find its endpoint, or the road loops in on itself before you go off into another direction of the road that you didn't explore before. So, alright, the world isn't worth exploring all that much. Maybe fighting the NPCs is worth it. I mean, I did say there is loot in the game, and that in and of itself could be worthy of a reward, right? Well, unfortunately, no. The loot in the game is almost entirely ignorable. There's a few select neat, rare items that you can find, sort of, but not actually hidden in the world all that much. But other than that, you're very quickly gonna find the optimal loot for your specific build and stick to that. Loot stats aren't randomized as far as I can tell, and if they are, they're randomized to such a minute extent that it's not noticeable. There are no legendary items to grind for, no rare epic items to fight bosses for over and over again. You always get everything on the first try. My inventory quickly filled up with duplicate items that no-name NPCs were dropping, or items that had the same stats but visually looked a tiny bit different. Once you've got what you want, fighting NPCs becomes kind of pointless and something of a bother, especially in some of the later areas. Why? Well, the fighting system shines and is clearly built as a 1 versus 1 style fighting system. But the game has a tendency to throw a large number of enemies in some of the later areas, usually resulting in 3v1, or in worst case scenarios, 5 versus 1. And in a system like this, where each hit can do a good chunk of damage and it relies on your ability to read your opponent and dodge and block accordingly and retaliate with smart, thought out responses, those big fights with multiple enemies quickly feels like a clusterfuck of nonsense, and your ability to dodge out of the way is immediately negated as the enemies start to surround you and beat you into the ground. Couple that with some narrow alleyways and a finicky camera when it gets to be too many enemies on screen, and it becomes clear that the game was not built for this type of fight. The final hour or so of the game, I found myself just running past every enemy because there was no point in fighting more than one of them. And even fighting one enemy became easy, as their combos and intelligence don't match that of another player, and the loot sure as hell wasn't worth spending my time on it. The final bit of the game involves this gorgeous huge tower that you climb, and it feels like it's supposed to be this immense challenge where you slowly fight harder NPCs in large number to prove your worth. But I couldn't help but laugh as I just skipped them all because fighting them wasn't worth my time, energy, effort, or frustration that came with fighting multiple enemies on a narrow path on a huge tower where I could fall and die. And when a player is just skipping what is perceived content, something has clearly gone very wrong. So the world is bland, the story is forgettable and non-existent, the loot in the game is borderline useless. What about the boss fights? Well, the boss fights are actually the best part of the PvE experience by far. So much so that I'm baffled there were only 9 bosses, as each boss is never backed up by any weird gimmick or trick. Each one feels like you're going toe to toe with a martial arts master, and it's a test of skill to defeat them. They bring their own moves to the table, and some have awesome little cutscenes right before you engage them. They're also the only ones in the game that give loot that's worthwhile in the forms of new special spells. So I'm blown away that there's only 9 of them in total. And when you beat the final boss, the story feels like it's about to head into its next big real chapter. But instead, it just abruptly ends. It feels like the whole game I played and beat in about 5 hours was a prequel to this much bigger and meatier game that doesn't actually exist. And sure, you can queue up for a 1v1 fight against other players and go toe-to-toe with them in an arena, and it's fun, but while I said this combat is really great and customizable, it's not built to be a purely 1v1 game like, say, Street Fighter. Street Fighter has a huge roster of characters, each with their own large, complex, and intricate moveset that you have to learn and master while learning other characters and understand them to defeat them in a fight. It's a fighting game built from the ground up to be a 1 versus 1 fighting game. Absolver, while deep, only has 4 different martial arts schools, and while it's customizable, there isn't the variety and depth of something like Street Fighter because that's not what this game was built to be. It has an identity crisis. Absolver doesn't know what it wants to be. It feels like it was trying to bring together so many different aspects of so many different games to make something cool and unique, and while it succeeded in making an awesome and customizable combat system with a neat journey-esque multiplayer implementation, I can't help but wish that the mechanics and system were lifted wholesale out of Absolver and put into an actual video game. I would love to see this system in a Jade Empire sequel, for example, or if they had stripped out the loot and the NPCs completely and made it a Shadow of the Colossus style boss rush only, where you explore the world looking only for the bosses to fight while still stumbling across players and fighting them or working with them to help defeat the bosses. The game had too many things it wanted to do, and it really desperately needed to find one thing and focus on it. It's fitting that the story of the game seems to take place in this world that exists purely for you to train in for something bigger that's yet to come, because that's what Absolver overall feels like. Something that was made as a test, but needs something bigger and better to really showcase its inherent abilities. But as it stands, Absolver is a really cool and fleshed out demo for something bigger and more satisfying that does not exist. I hope that whatever DLC Slow Clap Studios has planned for the game fleshes out what we have here, or if they get the chance to make a sequel, they spend more time on building a proper world and video game surrounding the otherwise incredible fighting mechanics. Because as it stands, it feels as though they spent all their time making this deep system, but forgot to surround it with a proper game worthy of playing. I hope I made it clear, but I do love the mechanics and the fighting system of Absolver. There's so much potential buried in what they've built here, but it's another game that is just reeking of missed potential. There's so much they could do with this game, both story-wise and gameplay-wise, if only they would narrow their focus and pick something that they wanted the game to be, instead of being this jack-of-all-trades, really master-of-none situation. And that's why I, the Honorable Judge Mathas, judge this game as guilty. Guilty of being so much less than what it could be. Thank you all so much for watching this episode of Judge Mathas. I hope you enjoyed. My question to you is simple. What's a game that you were super excited for but failed to live up to its potential? You could see the great ideas buried in the game, but just the developers never fully embraced or were able to make happen what they clearly wanted the game to be. Lost potential, unfulfilled potential, whatever you want to call it. What's a game that you played that you think fits that description? I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with a brand new video, and hopefully it's the one that I've been working on for a while. I've been really enjoying the game so far. As always, a huge special thanks to all my patrons over on Patreon for the support you give on the channel, and thank you, the viewer, for just watching the video. I'm so glad you guys are enjoying, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.